Welcome back, fellow explorers of the hidden. You're tuned in to Occult Archives, where we dust off, well, not literally, some of history's most notorious books. Yeah, those ones whispered about in hushed tones. We're talking grimoires, ancient texts, you know the type. The kind that supposedly holds secrets that are just too powerful, too dangerous for the uninitiated. But don't worry, we're here to safely crack those spines and decode those mysteries together. So settle in, because this is episode 151.
And today we're taking a deep dive into a book that goes beyond just spooky stories. It's about unlocking potential, maybe even power, within yourself. We're talking about William Walker Atkinson and his Mental Alchemy.
Mental Alchemy, William Walker Atkinson and the Forge of the Self, to be exact. It's a pretty fascinating title, I have to say, and it's actually a modern take on Atkinson's work from 1909. Originally, it was called The Arcane Formulas, or Mental Alchemy, which, has a bit more of that occult vibe.
Definitely. And this new edition, put out by Global Gray, it's from 2019, updated last year, 2023. Plus, it has that striking cover art by Carl Hessenflug, Monastery Ruins in Winter.
It sets the mood.
Oh, yeah. And if anyone wants to check out the book for themselves after our little deep dive, you can find it on globalgraybooks.com. But before you do that, let's dive into what this book is all about.
Well, in this deep dive, we'll be focusing on a concept that's central to Atkinson's teachings, egohood. And this might sound a bit familiar at first, but trust me, it goes much deeper than the everyday ego we usually talk about.
Does it, though? I mean, how is Atkinson's idea different? Because we're talking about self-mastery, and that usually involves, controlling your ego.
We'll see that's where things get interesting. Atkinson says that true egohood, the full realization of your ego, that's something you cultivate. It's not just this inherent negative thing you need to suppress, you actually earn it. It's a process.
So it's not about taming some wild beast within, more like sculpting a masterpiece, more like discovering a hidden power. And Atkinson, he's drawing on a lot of occult tradition here. He talks about the idea that we're all centers of consciousness and force, but we exist within this greater cosmic will, or spirit. He even quotes aphorism the 12th from his arcane lessons.
What's that say about the cosmic will and all that?
Well, it says, "There is but one life and not many lives. Separateness is but relative and partial illusory, the creative fiction of the cosmos. In the cosmic will, there is but one life in which, and by which, is manifested the many."
So we're all connected, part of this single life force.
Exactly. And egohood for Atkinson, it's about realizing your place in all of that.
Okay, but he says it's something you earn. Does that mean most of us aren't, actually aware of our own egos, even though we use the word I all the time?
Right. And it's so easy to assume, of course, I know myself, I say I all day long, but Atkinson challenges that. He says many people would be surprised, even a bit offended, to hear they haven't fully reached egohood.
I can see how that might ruffle some feathers.
Right. But he's making a distinction between, let's call it everyday self-awareness, and the full consciousness of egohood, which he says is a totally different level.
Okay, so how do we even begin to understand what this egohood is?
He starts by showing what it's not. He kind of lays out this spectrum of consciousness, starting with the simplest life forms.
So like single-celled organisms and stuff.
Exactly. He says their awareness is basically focused on what's outside, just pure sensation and feeling. Then you have atoms with their attraction and repulsion, then a bit more complex with chemical affinity, and crystals. He sees them as taking this a step further, building up forms and all that.
So a progression, like steps on a ladder.
Exactly. Then you've got plants and lower animals. They have what Atkinson calls simple consciousness. They know stuff like where to find food and what's dangerous, but they don't really know that they know, if you get what I mean.
It's instinct, not reflection.
Right. And he says even higher animals, and some less developed humans, function mostly at this level. It's about survival.
Interesting. So where do we, as, supposedly developed humans, fit into this whole scheme? When does that sense of I come in?
That's where self-consciousness develops. That's when you start to separate yourself, the I, from everything else, the not self. It's knowing that you know, like recognizing your mind is thinking. You turn inward.
Makes sense. So it's like I'm thinking about this apple, not just apple, food.
Yeah, exactly. You're aware of your own mental processes. But even then, Atkinson says, most people are only at the beginning stages of self-consciousness.
Okay, so what's the next level up? What's that full egohood that he's talking about?
He calls it spiritual consciousness. It goes beyond just the physical and mental. It's the awareness of your individuality, distinct from personality.
Wait, hold on. Individuality versus personality, those seem pretty intertwined.
Right, but Atkinson's making a distinction. Think of it like this. He compares personality to an actor's mask. The word person comes from the Greek persona, meaning, well, a mask. So your personality, it's the role you're playing in life, your John Smith part, if you will.
So like all the stuff we usually think of as me, the job, the hobbies, the quirks.
Exactly. It's all part of the act. And being conscious of your personality is just knowing the script, the character traits. But ego consciousness, that's seeing yourself as the actor behind the mask. It's realizing, hey, I'm not just this role.
So it's about not getting lost in the character.
Exactly. It's
Right.
realizing that you're more than just John Smith, the doctor, the parent, the whatever. There's something deeper there.
That's a pretty powerful idea. So how do you actually achieve that? How do you develop this egohood?
Atkinson, he lays out a bunch of exercises and formulas in his book, and that's what we're going to delve into. But first, it's important to understand what this egohood, this individuality, actually is. It's that awareness of being a center of consciousness, a force within that cosmic life we talked about earlier.
Okay, so it's not just about like shedding your personality entirely. You're still part of the whole thing.
Right. He's not saying to become some blank slate. It's more about realizing your true place, your unique role within the larger cosmic drama. And this isn't just a mental idea, he stresses that. It has to be experienced. It's not just agreeing with the concept. It's that gut-level knowing.
So not just reading about it in a book, you have to actually feel it.
Exactly. It's like knowing you exist. You don't need someone to prove it to you, you just know. And Atkinson says egohood is like that.
Okay, so that's egohood. But is it the same as like full-blown cosmic consciousness, merging with the universe and all that?
Well, not necessarily at this stage. He talks about cosmic consciousness as a more advanced state. It's that complete awareness of your identity with the whole cosmic spirit. But for egohood, what's important is realizing that you are an ego, a spiritual entity, distinct from your personality and your body.
So it's a stepping stone, a foundation.
Exactly. And he says these lessons are specifically for those who are ready to move beyond just personality, but they might be hitting some roadblocks.
So if this is resonating with you, with any of our listeners, that's a sign that you're on the right track.
Yeah, it's like a call to adventure. You're ready to break free from those limitations.
Okay, so let's say you're ready. What's in it for you? What's the point of all this egohood stuff?
Well, Atkinson says this is where you find the secret of attainment and the key of power, because once you realize you are spirit, that's when you can truly tap into its power. He says, spirit is the sucker of the cosmos. The ego is a focal point or center in that essence.
So it's about realizing your true nature and then, what, wielding that power.
Yeah, it's about understanding who you really are and then stepping into that role. And that's where his formulas come in. He gives you practical steps to actually cultivate this ego consciousness.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the first step? Where do you even begin?
Well, the second lesson, it's titled Establishing the Ego. And he starts by talking about what it means to establish something. It's making it firm, steady, stable.
Like building a foundation.
Exactly. And this particular formula, he says it's ancient, been used in occult teachings for ages. It's all about fixing your ego consciousness. It's that identification with your deeper self, not just the everyday personality.
Okay, so you're not just aware of it, it becomes like a bedrock of your being.
Yeah, it's like a constant point of reference.
Yeah.
And he says once it's established, it's like a refuge, a tower of strength in the face of all those challenges life throws your way.
That's a pretty appealing prospect. So how do you actually go about establishing this ego consciousness?
The very first step, and he emphasizes this a lot, is realizing that your ego is not your body. That it's something above and beyond the physical. The body is just a tool.
Okay, so we're back to that actor in the mask. The ego is the actor, the body is the costume.
Precisely. And even people who consider themselves mostly mental or intellectual, he says, they still need to really internalize this idea.
I can see how that could be easy to forget, to get caught up in the physical world.
Oh, absolutely. So he gives this exercise, a pretty simple one. He says to find a quiet place, get comfortable, and then just focus your attention on your body.
Like a body scan meditation.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But you start from your feet and work your way up, part by part, all the way to your brain. And the idea is, as you do this, you start to see yourself as something separate from the body. You become the observer.
So it's like, these are my feet, not I am my feet.
Exactly. You start to realize that the body is a kind of garment for the ego, a temporary shell. And it might not happen right away, he says, but with practice, that realization deepens.
Okay, so that's the first exercise. What comes next? How do you take this separation further?
Well, the next exercise uses a bit more imagination. So You start by focusing on your feet again, but this time you think of them as tools that your ego is using to walk.
Okay, like my ego is the driver and my feet are the wheels.
Yeah, exactly. And then you imagine, what if you didn't have feet? What if they were gone? Would your ego still exist?
I guess so. I mean, it'd be inconvenient, but I wouldn't cease to be.
Right. And you extend that to other parts of the body, your legs, your organs, your head, even your brain. You see them all as tools, important but not essential to the ego's existence.
So it's like, I have a brain, but I am not my brain.
Precisely. And the whole body becomes this intricate machine that your ego is using to experience life in the physical world. And he says, once you realize this, you can actually start to consciously direct energy to your body to strengthen and heal it. He calls it Brill.
Vril, what's that?
It's a kind of life force, vital energy.
Yeah.
And he says, when you truly grasp that your ego is the master, you can control that energy flow.
That's pretty powerful stuff. So are there more exercises along these lines?
Oh yeah, there are a few more in this lesson. The third one is about visualizing yourself outside of your body. You picture yourself looking down at your physical form.
Kind of like an out-of-body experience.
Exactly. And even just practicing this mentally, he says, it can help you realize that it is possible for your ego to exist apart from the body, that your physical form is just a shell.
I can see how that would be a pretty profound experience.
Oh, absolutely. And some people might say, well, that's just imagination. But Atkinson, he has a response to that.
What's that?
He says, try to imagine yourself as dead, really dead. Not just your body, but you, your ego, gone.
I don't think I could do that.
Exactly. He says you can only imagine your body dead, but your soul, your ego, that's still alive, either observing or still somehow connected to the body. The ego is inherently alive, he says.
That's a pretty convincing argument, actually.
Right. And then there's the fourth exercise. It builds on that idea of separating from the body. He calls it an outgrown shell in this one.
Okay, what do you do with this outgrown shell?
You imagine yourself inhabiting different bodies, one after another, going through different stages of life, different circumstances.
Like a soul hopping through time?
Kind of. And the point is to really drive home that your ego is something beyond any particular physical form.
So it's my body, not I again.
Exactly. But he's careful to add that you shouldn't despise the body. He emphasizes that it's a valuable tool, a temple of the spirit. You need to take care of it, respect it.
That makes sense. It's a partnership, not an enemy.
Exactly. It's like a vehicle you're using for this particular journey.
So that's a lot to take in, just in the first lesson. What comes next in this process of establishing the ego?
Well, the next lesson is establishing the ego too. And he starts by saying that if you keep practicing those exercises, you'll start to experience yourself differently. You'll feel your ego existing on this higher plane, mastering the physical body. He even says you might start to sense an ability to heal yourself mentally, and maybe even others.
That's a pretty wild. So does it mean you've reached full egohood at that point?
Not quite. He cautions against thinking you've completely escaped personality just yet.
Okay, so there's more to it than just separating from the body.
Right. He says the arcane teachers, they guide their students to first get free from that physical identification. And then you build a higher, more refined personality, like a more conscious version of yourself. And eventually that gets transcended as you move towards pure individuality.
So it's a process, step by step. You master one level before moving on to the next.
Exactly. Don't try to skip ahead.
Good advice. So what's the next step? What does this refined personality look like?
Well, the next exercise is all about incorporeality. It's about realizing that life and consciousness can exist without a physical body.
Okay, so we're going beyond the physical again.
Right. He says to contrast corporeal life, which is all about the physical, with incorporeal life.
Yeah.
And you use meditation and imagination to realize that your astral body, your energy body, can pass through stuff that would destroy the physical body.
Like walking through walls and stuff.
Yeah, kind of. It's about realizing that you're not limited by physical laws in the same way. And he talks about ancient occult initiations, where they'd have people imagine themselves in dangerous situations, but unharmed because they were in their astral form.
So like mentally facing your fears?
Yeah, but taking it a step further, it's about realizing that your ego, your true self, is not subject to those kinds of harms. You can't be hurt or wounded on that level.
That's a powerful concept.
Right. And he tells a story about an arcane teacher who was totally calm when everyone else was freaking out about the world ending. And then there's Emerson, the philosopher, who was equally chill when a doomsayer was predicting the apocalypse.
So it's about cultivating that inner peace, that unshakable sense of self.
Exactly. And the point of those stories is that This isn't just some theory, it's something you can actually experience.
Okay, so you're free from the physical.
Yeah.
What's the next step in this ego building process?
Well, the next stage is what he calls focalizing consciousness on the ego.
So it's like zeroing in on that core self.
Right. But you're still within the realm of personality, he says. But it's a higher level that starts to blend into individuality. And the goal here is to really solidify your sense of being this distinct center of consciousness, a force within the cosmic life.
Okay, so it's like gathering all those scattered pieces of yourself and bringing them into focus.
Exactly. It's preparing you for the next stage of transformation.
So how do you do that? How do you focalize consciousness?
He has this meditation for it. You start by picturing a vast ocean. And within that ocean, there are all these individuals, each a center of consciousness, a force. And then you imagine yourself as the actual center, the pivot point around which everything revolves.
Like you're the center of the universe.
Yeah, in a way. He says to feel yourself as the focal center of the cosmos. And there's an occult axiom he quotes. The cosmos is infinite. Its circumference is nowhere. Its center is everywhere.
That's a mind-bending concept.
Right. And during this meditation, you let go of all thoughts about the outside world. You focus entirely on that inner affirmation, I am.
So it's all about that core statement of being.
Exactly. And he even shares a story about a student who is practicing this, and they were afraid of dissolving into the oneness, but what they experienced was this incredibly clear sense of I remaining.
So it's not about losing yourself, but finding your true place within the whole.
Exactly. And he keeps emphasizing the power of that affirmation, I am. He says it's been used by arcane teachers for millennia. It's a fundamental statement of being, a key to unlocking egohood.
Okay, so we've tackled the physical body and this idea of incorporeality. What's the next hurdle in establishing the ego?
Well, the next lesson, it's called Establishing the Ego, and it really gets to the heart of the matter. It's about going beyond that initial freedom from the physical self, which was the focus of the earlier lessons. He says that's just the first step.
Okay, so what's the bigger challenge?
It's loosening the bonds of personality itself. He says that's what really holds the ego back, even more than the identification with the body.
But we've been talking about transcending personality this whole time. What's different now?
It's about getting to the more subtle levels. He introduces this distinction between the me and the I.
Okay, what's the difference?
The me, that's all the stuff you think of as yourself, your personality traits, your likes, dislikes, your attachments, your habits. The me is the character you play in life, your John Smith persona.
So it's like the mask we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. But the I, that's the real actor behind the mask, the one who's unchanging, the constant observer.
Okay, I'm starting to see the difference. The me is the role. The I is the one playing the role.
Exactly. And Atkinson says it's really hard to separate from that me because we're so used to identifying with it.
It's like our comfort zone, even if it's not really us.
Right. And he gives a formula for starting to loosen those bonds. It's a mental exercise, kind of like taking inventory of yourself.
What do you mean?
He says to get in the calm state and ask yourself, what am I? And at first, you'll probably just list off all those me things, your name, job, likes, dislikes, all that.
So it's like, I'm John Smith, the grocer. I like pizza. I hate traffic jams, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. But then he says to mentally set those things aside, one by one. First your likes, then dislikes, then other characteristics.
And what happens when you do that?
He says you realize that the I remains even when you've stripped away all those things. There's something that's beyond all those traits and feelings.
Like you're peeling back the layers of the onion and there's still something at the core.
Right. And then he has you imagine playing different characters, like Hamlet or Richard III.
Yeah.
You realize that your usual personality is just a tool, something you can change, but the I stays the same.
So it's about recognizing the actor behind the role, the one who can take on different parts.
Exactly. And he goes into a lot of detail about the nature of this I. He says it's subjective, everything else is objective to it. You can't separate from it. It's the self, and it's also the source of your will, your ability to act.
Okay, so there's a connection between the I and will.
Oh yeah, that's a big part of this whole thing. But for now, the focus is on separating that I from all those me things.
Okay, so you do this mental inventory, you start to see the difference. What's the next step?
He gives another formula, one of the arcane teachers use. It's about really soaring in the ether of individuality, he says.
Sounds lofty.
It is. It's about reaching that inner center. So again, you start calm and relaxed, and then you meditate on your identity, your separateness from the world around you. You try to reach that inner core, the real self.
Okay, I can picture that. What's the technique?
This one's a bit different. You softly repeat your own name to yourself. The name you think of yourself as, the third person name.
Like John Smith, John Smith, John Smith.
Yeah, but maybe shorter, more intimate. The name that really resonates with you. And you focus all your attention on it like it holds the secret to your being.
That's interesting. Does it work?
He says it can. It can lift you to a higher plane, help you see the light within, even hear the song of life, he says. It's about realizing the I, the secret of the ego.
That's pretty powerful stuff.
Right. And he even gives examples from literature. He talks about Rudyard Kipling's Kim, where the main character does this, repeating his name, trying to figure out who he is.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, Kim, he's trying to find himself, and he keeps asking, who is Kim? And there's this holy man who recognizes what he's doing. He says, thou was wondering there in thy spirit what manner of thing thy soul might be. I know. Who should know but I?
So even fictional characters are grappling with these questions.
Exactly. And then Atkinson talks about Tennyson, the poet. He said that repeating his own name would lift him into another world, give him the certainty of his spiritual nature. He even wrote poetry about it.
Really? What did he say?
Well, he wrote, and more, my son, for more than once when I sat all alone, revolving in myself, that word which is the symbol of myself, the mortal symbol of the self was loosed, and passed into the nameless as a cloud melts into heaven. I touched my limbs. The limbs were strange, not mine, and yet no shadow of doubt, but utter dearness, and through loss of self, the gain of such large life as matched with ours were sun to spark, unshakable in words, themselves but shadows of a shadow world.
That's pretty amazing. It sounds like a powerful experience.
Yeah, and it shows that this simple act of repeating your name can actually unlock something profound.
Okay, so we've done all these exercises. We're starting to get a feel for this I, this ego. But how does it connect to will? That's been hinted at, but not fully explored yet.
Well, that's what the next lesson is all about. It's called will focalization. And he starts by saying that once you've truly found yourself, as they say in occult circles, you realize that the real self is way different than you probably imagined. It's not just a bunch of traits, it's a potentiality. But it also exists powerfully in that I am sense.
So it's both unlimited potential and a concrete reality.
Exactly. And all those formulas we've been talking about, they're designed to strip away those personality attributes from the ego, to reveal that core essence.
Like refining gold, removing the impurities.
Yes. And what you're left with, he calls it this unknown ultimate element. It's the ego, the I am, always at the center, but hard to define.
Because it's beyond words.
Exactly. Our language is all about personality, and the I transcends that. But both occult and mainstream psychology, he says, they point to one thing that this I is connected to: will.
Okay, so that's the link. But what does he mean by will? It seems like a pretty basic concept.
He's not talking about just everyday willpower like forcing yourself to go to the gym. He's talking about the deepest level of will, the underlying essence of being. It's that fundamental life, mind, spirit principle, the core of yourself.
So it's more than just making choices.
Way more. He talks about how ancient Greek philosophers, Buddhists, even modern thinkers like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, they all saw will as this fundamental force.
So it's a pretty universal concept.
Yeah. And the arcane teachers, they equate will with spirit. It's the very beingness of being, constantly moving, changing, evolving. It has the potential for everything, but it's not limited to any one form.
That's a lot to unpack.
Right. And to really illustrate this, he quotes a lecture by Professor William Sturgis Bigelow. It's about Buddhism and immortality. And Bigelow, he talks about all the different things we're conscious of: our body, sensations, emotions, desires. But will, he says, is different. We don't feel it in the same way. It's always subjective, always active.
So it's like the driving force behind everything else.
Yeah, he says it can dominate and direct both sensations and emotions. Those things are objective to the will.
Okay, so it's powerful stuff.
Yeah, and Bigelow, he goes on to say that you can't really separate yourself from will. You can't analyze it or change it directly. It's the thing that changes everything else.
So it's like the ultimate prime mover.
Exactly. And he says it can be overpowered by other things, by strong sensations or emotions, but it's always there, always active, either resisting or directing.
So even when it seems like we're being controlled by our emotions, the will is still there, fighting back.
Yeah, and he says that the only thing that really limits will is our sense of separate personality.
So the more we identify with that me, the less free our will is.
Exactly. He even says that Descartes' famous quote, "I think, therefore I am," should really be, "I will, therefore I am.
Wow, that's a pretty radical reinterpretation.
It is, and it highlights how central will is to our being. So to bring it back to Atkinson, he's saying that the I, that core self we've been exploring, it's ultimately will. It's the potential for everything, the driving force of all activity.
Okay, so it's not just some passive awareness, it's this dynamic creative force.
Right. And he ties it back to desire. He talks about how all our desires ultimately stem from the cosmic will. It's this chain of desire, an endless circle.
So our individual will is connected to this greater cosmic will.
Exactly. And he introduces this concept of willing to will, which is about realizing the union of those two. It's where true individual will arises. He says this is the first lesson of the arcane secret of the excluded middle.
That sounds pretty mysterious.
It is. But basically, it's about recognizing that your will isn't separate from the cosmic will. It's about aligning yourself with that greater force. And when you do that, he says, you become the master of your own destiny.
That's a pretty empowering idea.
Right. And it all starts with understanding the nature of the ego, that core I am that is ultimately will. It's about realizing your true potential and then using that power to create the life you want.
So it's not just about self-discovery, it's about self-creation.
Exactly. And we hope that this deep dive into Atkinson's ideas has given you some food for thought, some inspiration to explore your own inner world and unlock your own potential.
It's definitely a lot to think about. And for anyone who wants to delve deeper, we highly recommend checking out Atkinson's work, especially Mental Alchemy.
Yes. And as you continue your exploration, we leave you with this question. If your truest essence is will, what are you choosing to create? What will you bring into being?
That's a powerful question to ponder. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring the hidden corners of knowledge.